Hi everyone, welcome to On the Other Hand. I'm Ariane Zurcher, and today I'm going to be demonstrating the scroll stitch. I covered this stitch in one of the circles for the Insta Stitch with Sue project, but I didn't do it in depth, and it was a 1-inch circle, so I think it was a little difficult for people to see. I've tried to go over some of the possible problems that can come up when doing the scroll stitch, and so I hope that this will be helpful. I show this stitch in a couple of different weights as well as different types of thread so that you can see what it looks like. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. If you want to receive an email notification, click on that little bell icon. And I love hearing from you. Leave me any comments or questions you have in the comments section. Don't forget to check out the description section. That's where I put links for all the different threads that I use in this video. Grab something to stitch with, grab a needle and some thread, and let's stitch together. I'm going to put my scroll stitch along the edge of this ribbon. And I want my scroll to go out. I'm going to start on the right-hand side because I'm left-handed. And I'm going to come up on the edge here. And I'm using my Silk and Pearl Lavender Fields. I'm going to come up. I'm going to take a little diagonal stitch right next to where I come up. I'm going to make sure that my thread is under the needle and I'm wrapping it clockwise around the front. I anchor it with my thumb as I pull my needle up. This is the part that gets a little tricky. I want my scroll to lay against this upper edge of the ribbon. But I don't want this loop to disappear. If I pull this hard, it's going to completely disappear if I pull it hard enough. So I pull it just enough so that this edge here is laying again where I want it to. And then I'm going to anchor that with my thumb while I take my next little diagonal stitch. Merlin has come to investigate. I take my thread, I wrap it behind the needle, and I pull my needle through. I pull this until it's small enough that it's keeping a consistent little scroll, but not so much that it's disappearing. And now I'm going to anchor that with my thumb so that when I take my next stitch, I don't inadvertently pull that out. And now I take my next little diagonal stitch. I want it to be about the same distance away from the other. I'm going to continue in this fashion, looping my thread under the needle, pulling it through, and then making sure that when I pull it, I don't pull so hard that I'm taking that loop and removing it completely. Anchoring that with my thumb, taking my next little diagonal stitch, looping that around clockwise, pulling my needle through, and then pulling it so that I get that nice little cursive. I really want that little loop to be prominent so that I can see it. Now the other thing is to keep in mind is your diagonal stitch. I'm keeping mine fairly small. If you make it larger, your scroll is going to be a bit larger as well, but it also can become a little more unruly and harder to control. If it drops down too much, I can just use my needle to pull that loop up a little and then pull this so that it's going where I want it to, and then anchor it. And then I'm going to anchor that loop down because I've come to the end. And there's my scroll stitch. It's a really pretty stitch when you're able to get it right. And it looks like it's going to be very easy, but it's actually a little tricky in that one has to make sure that that little loop doesn't get lost. It's so easy for it to get lost. So let me show you with a couple of different threads. I'm using a number 3, it's Sue Spargo's variegated eleganza thread, and I've threaded up a chenille number 18 needle. The scroll stitch for me, left-handed, I'm going to work from the right to the left. I start pulling my thread up. I'm going to take a little diagonal stitch right here. I'm going to pull that thread around clockwise, and I'm pulling my needle through. And what will happen is I'm going to get a little scroll or a wave-like looking stitch. If I pull it too much, this is going to disappear. So I want to be aware of that little loop remaining. So I anchor that with my thumb while I take my next little diagonal stitch. I'm going to wrap that thread around. I'm still anchoring that other one. And I finally let go when I pull this through. Wrapping that thread clockwise, pulling it through, and making sure that I don't pull it so much that it does this. Do you see what happens? I'm going to lose it, and it's just going to have a little, it's going to look like that. I don't want that. I want that nice little loop here. So I need to make sure I don't pull this so tightly that I've lost my loop. I'm going to show you what happens if I take a really big diagonal stitch. So if I take a bigger diagonal stitch, this is what it's going to look like. I want my thread to come up against the edge here of my applique. I don't want it falling below, but I still want to keep that nice round loop. So what happens is I just get a bigger loop, but it can, if it gets too big, it can become a little bit difficult to control. I tend to make mine smaller, but for the demonstration, I just want to show you what happens when you do a bigger one. So the point is that you can manipulate how this looks by how big a diagonal stitch you take, how much on the diagonal it is, and how much you pull that thread. By tacking that scroll down, and there it is. You can see as it got bigger, the loop got bigger. I've threaded up a number 18 chenille needle with my Aurora thread. So I'm going to come up on my right-hand side because I'm going to be going left. I'm going to take my little diagonal stitch here and wrap that thread around. And I'm going to pull it through until this lower thread is where I want it. And I'm going to come back, take my little diagonal stitch, take that lower thread, wrap it behind the needle in a clockwise, pull my thread through, pushing that thread up so it lays against my seam, which is where I want it to go, keeping that loop intact, anchoring it down with my thumb, and taking my next stitch. Because I'm ending it here. I'll go ahead and do one that's going in the inside. This is Ivy League, and that's the Dalla thread. It's comparable to a number 5 weight. I'm threading up a number 18 chenille. And so I want so let's say that this was my circle, and I wanted, instead of it being on the outside, fanning out the way this one does, I want it going in. Then I'm going to just turn so that the applique is above as opposed to below. And I'm going to start my stitch. That's the Dalla, this is the Aurora, this is the number 3, and this is my Silken Pearl. I hope this helped, seeing the scroll stitch done in a little slower motion than the circle video that I did demonstrating it on a 1-inch circle. I think it can be tricky, and I hope some of these tips will be helpful to you. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Click on that little bell to get an email notification. And don't forget to check out the description section. That's where I'm going to leave links to all the different threads that I use in this video. Until next time, here's to stitching together.